Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's JPR, and welcome back to another funeral. Because guess what? We're talking about Pokemon who fell off harder than Tom Brady in his last season. Pokemon that used to absolutely dominate their respective fields who are now in the basement. These are the Pokemon who aged extremely poorly. Number 1, Jynx. For cultural reasons. Number 2, Tauros. Tauros used to be an absolute king in Gen 1. Thanks to his 110 base speed, 100 base attack, and access to the incredibly strong Gen 1 move, Hyper Beam, which didn't have the recharge if you KO'd an opponent. Thank you, Gen 1 coding, very cool. With loopholes like that, it's no surprise that the Gen 1 market looked awfully bullish on this Pokemon. Even after losing the broken version of Hyper Beam and a special attack stat that was way higher than it had any right to be, Tauros still maintained some level of competitive relevancy until Gen 4 when the bottom finally fell out. Unfortunately, normal just isn't the powerhouse type it used to be, and as Pokemon has power creeped higher over time, there are just too many Pokemon who do Tauros' job now, but better. But it isn't all bad news, as the 3 new Tauros variations have breathed some much needed life into this Pokemon. All 3 have solid enough typings, access to great moves, and the always useful ability Intimidate. Tauros certainly has the tools to be competitive, but it's almost certainly never seeing the top tier ever again. Another great Gen 1 sweeper, Articuno, has also aged incredibly poorly. Not just in the competitive landscape, but as a legendary overall, since that's arguably the most power-crept category of all Pokemon. Of course, Articuno was helped by an immensely powerful version of Blizzard in Gen 1, with accuracy so high it would make Stormtroopers look like amateurs. Well, I guess they have no problem doing that already. As well as its abnormally high special stats, granting it 125 special attack and special defense at the same time. Like Tauros, despite receiving substantial nerfs, it stayed fairly relevant until the end of Gen 3. Then, Stealth Rocks decided to dig its grave in Gen 4, and it hasn't climbed out since. Of course, it doesn't help that Ice as a type has gradually weakened over time as well. Articuno is now widely regarded as one of the worst legendary Pokemon alongside the likes of Regigigas, Regice, and Silvally. Also, I know people are gonna bring this one up if I don't, and yes, it's true, Gengar did slightly fall off after losing Levitate in Gen 7. But it's not nearly as drastic of a decline as some people make it out to be. Gengar is still a very scary Pokemon. On the battlefield at least, he's kinda goofy otherwise. Dude is the epitome of a glass cannon, and as a fast ghost type, he'll always have a purpose on many teams, levitating or not. Our next Pokemon is strange because although it was a Gen 1 Pokemon, it didn't peak until Gen 2. And we've talked about it before on this channel. Marowak. Marowak was quite frankly awful in Gen 1, and was probably the single biggest Pokemon to benefit from the new Held Items mechanic in Gen 2. With a Thick Club doubling its attack stat, this thing could hit harder than any Pokemon in existence. This is not a joke, it literally hits the stat cap of 999 after using Swords Dance once. However, as time went on, Marowak would begin to suffer from what False Swipe Gaming coined as the Rampardos theorem. AKA a Pokemon that has immense attack but lackluster stats in basically every other area. As a pure ground type in Gen 2, this drawback wasn't all that glaring back in the day. But naturally, as more and more Pokemon get introduced over time, that's just more and more threats that can exploit Marowak's horrible speed and relatively lacking bulk. Maybe if Marowak were given a single priority move it could salvage some decent usage, but for the moment this Pokemon is stuck with its pitiful base 45 speed. For our next Pokemon, we unfortunately have a fan favorite. Time for me to take cover from the comment section. Celebi. Celebi was a literal freak of nature in the earlier gens. With an immensely large move pool and evenly distributed stats that allow it to adapt to nearly any role, it's easy to see why this thing was amazing. Unfortunately, Celebi's rather poor defensive typing of Grass Psychic is one of the main culprits behind its demise, along with its base 100 speed slowly becoming less and less controlling as time marched on. Back in the day, hardly any Pokemon broke through the 100 base speed tier. But now that barrier is being broken into more than a car in LA. And you know what move is especially common on really fast Pokemon these days? That's right, U-turn. If you ever learned how to do one of these babies in driver's ed, congratulations, you now counter Celebi. Celebi is pretty much forced to switch at the sight of a fast Pokemon who might carry U-turn. It just doesn't have the controlling field presence it once did, which was arguably one of its greatest strengths. Oh boy, the next one is another fan favorite. I hope people are smart enough to realize that I actually like these Pokemon. I'm just explaining why they're not as good anymore. They probably won't. Flygon! With a massive move pool, excellent typing, and a solid base 100 speed, you could slap a Choice Scarf for this baby and go to town. Flygon was widely considered a fantastic Pokemon for the durations of Gens 3, 4, and 5. However, Flygon sadly wasn't able to keep up with the times. Flygon even finally received Dragon Dance in Gen 7 after nearly 15 long years without it, but even that wasn't enough to bring back the glory days. If anything, Flygon's problem now is that it's too honest. It's not a bad Pokemon by any means, but there's no single department other than entry hazard removal where it really shines. Fairy types have certainly put a damper on its sweeping potential as it lacks a good steel type coverage move. In general, Flygon also struggles against bulky water types, and similar to Celebi, that base 100 speed is no longer nearly as impressive as it once was. Flygon is kinda like one of those tricked out 2004 Honda Civics that sounds like it's blowing up when it passes you on the highway. Sure, it's going fast, but there are newer, nicer cars you can just buy, or in the case of Pokemon, you can just get them for free. In a similar vein, we have Metagross. This guy used to dominate the higher tiers back in the day, especially in Gens 3 and 4, due to it being one of the first excellent steel types, with an impressive moveset and tons of differing strategies. Although Metagross was still considered a top tier Pokemon in Gen 5, it was clear that its time in the limelight was running out. At this point, Metagross was outclassed as both a support and an offense-based Pokemon. If you wanted to set Stealth Rocks or be a general tank, well, Ferrothorn and various other Pokemon just did that way better. If you wanted to sweep, there were already way better Pokemon around, like Excadrill, Garchomp, or Landorus, all of which have favorable matchups against Metagross, I might add. At this stage, the main thing holding Metagross back was its rather unimpressive base 70 speed. This meant Metagross was pretty much forced to have a setup move like Agility or run the considerably weaker attacking move of Bullet Punch. Not Scizor's Bullet Punch either, I mean regular, unboosted, base 40 Bullet Punch. Gen 6 threw Metagross a bone with the introduction of Fairies and granted it one of the best Mega Evolutions in the game, but that just proved to be a temporary band-aid. Fast forward to the modern day and Metagross's issues have only gotten worse, at least in the singles metagame. In VGC, Metagross is actually still a remarkably good Pokemon. With access to Stomping Tantrum, Rock Slide, and Clear Body, which allows it to negate Intimidate, it has a really good niche in that format. So fear not, Metagross fans, your boy still has a format where it can do some damage. At least, whenever it's included in the decks. Come to think of it, there's someone else who's trying really hard to not fall off, and it's me, guys. It's me. We're less than 9,000 subscribers from 200k, so if you're enjoying the video, it would mean a lot to me if you subscribed and liked the video. Every person counts. Our next entry is a 2-for-1. Both of these Pokemon had existed for several generations, but only served one generation as top-tier Pokemon. Politoed and Cantonian Ninetales. In Gen 5, they were blessed with the hidden abilities of Drizzle and Drought, effectively making them legalized versions of Groudon and Kyogre. And just like that, they were drafted by every country for the weather wars to come. If I'm being real, they didn't even do a lot in Gen 5. They set the weather and maybe got a single move off if they were lucky. As long as your opponent didn't have their weather set up, then they had effectively done their jobs. But with weather setting abilities like Drought and Drizzle getting nerfed to only 5 turns in Gen 6, they both tumbled down the tier list. It certainly didn't help that Pokemon like Charizard and Tyranitar could Mega Evolve to set up their own weather with decreased priority, effectively making them really good counters to traditional weather setting Pokemon. In Sun and Moon, any hope of these Pokemon making a comeback was shattered immediately, as Torkoal and Pelipper would be given these same abilities, basically just making them better versions of Ninetales and Politoed all around, since they could actually do stuff other than just set up Rain or Sun. At the very least, Alolan Ninetales managed to take its Cantonian brethren's place in the top tier with a very similar ability, Snow Warning. But holding the record for possibly the quickest fall from grace of all time, we have Talonflame. 3 words: Gale, Wings, Nerf. In case you weren't part of the great boomer wars of Gen 6 like I was, allow me to lay it on you. Ahem. Priority Brave Bird and Acrobatics go crazy. In Gen 7, Game Freak immediately realized their mistake and nerfed Gale Wings to only activate when the user has full HP. Talonflame's funeral was held on the following Tuesday. Long story short, without priority on its insanely powerful flying moves, Talonflame is little more than a frail bird with a few decent support moves. Though, admittedly, Talonflame has made a bit of a resurgence in Gen 9. With the addition of heavy-duty boots in Gen 8 and many new Pokemon who are very weak to flying, see Slitherwing and Lokix, has actually given Talonflame a fighting shot. Though it's still very early and depending on which Pokemon the DLC brings back, things could change rapidly. For the last Pokemon I want to talk about today, it's one that you really wouldn't expect, but I've seen very few Pokemon who were incredible for as long as this Pokemon was, and fell off this hard. This Pokemon is none other than Jolteon. Jolteon was considered one of the very best glass cannons in the game for not just 3 generations, not 4 generations, but the first 5 generations. And surprisingly, it managed this all while having an exceptionally shallow move pool. Usually, it's very hard to use anything other than Thunderbolt, Shadow Ball, Signal Beam, or Hidden Power Ice on this Pokemon. But even with just those 4 moves, it kept itself afloat in the higher tiers. Jolteon's problems started in Gen 6. Some speedy electric types like Thundurus and Galvantula were already beginning to creep into Jolteon's territory in Gen 5, but with the addition of Mega Manectric and X and Y, it was clear Jolteon was no longer the top dog. Even Heliolisk, who on paper has less impressive stats than Jolteon, at least had access to a much wider move pool and synergized better with rain teams. And this only continued into Gen 7, which introduced numerous Pokemon who did Jolteon's job, but better, such as Tapu Koko and Zeraora. Gen 8 would deliver the killing blow to Jolteon though, as it lost access to Hidden Power. If Jolteon had a kiddie pool of moves to choose from before, it now has a puddle. Without Hidden Power Ice, Jolteon is now effectively hard countered by every ground type in the game. Another staple in its moveset, Signal Beam, was also inexplicably removed from the game and hasn't returned since. This left Jolteon with an absolutely pitiful selection of attacking moves: Thunderbolt, Hyper Voice, Shadow Ball, and Volt Switch. If you're keeping track at home, that's only 4 types Jolteon can hit for super effective damage now, whereas it used to be able to hit 8. You would think that Terra Ice and Terra Blast would at least make Jolteon somewhat of a threat again, but you do have to Terastallize into an Ice type, usually not the best option. And in general, it's just not a great Pokemon to waste your Terra on. This Pokemon did not just fall off, it hit rock bottom. To be honest, I could keep going. There are several dozen more Pokemon that have stories equally as sad as this lot, but the video's gotta end somewhere. Maybe I'll talk about some more poorly aged Pokemon in the future, but to see that, you better be subscribed. Before I go, I also gotta thank my newest channel member, James Goldsmith. I appreciate your support. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.